She was not watching the man in the suit when the wallet left his pocket. She was watching the young man in the yellow trainers who had been moving 3 steps behind him for the past half block. The kind of movement that was not quite walking, more like a management of distance, too deliberate, too precisely calibrated to be casual. Adaze Obi had been at her groundnut stall on the pavement near Airport City in Accra for 11 years. In that time, she had learned the difference between a man walking through a crowd and a man working it. This one was working it. It was 9:43 a.m. on a Thursday, and the stretch of pavement between the Trotro stop and the entrance to the office blocks was full of the particular heedlessness of a crowd that has somewhere to be and has stopped watching anything that isn't directly in its path. Workers adjusting bags, people on phones, a man with a sachet water cart pushing against the flow, nobody watching a young man manage his distance from an older one. The wallet was out and gone in 3 seconds. The young man in the yellow trainers was already 40 meters ahead before the man in the suit had any reason to notice. He was still on his phone. He had not felt a thing. Adaze stood up from her stall. What she could not have known on that Thursday morning was what would be standing at her front door 4 days later. Her name was Adaze Obi. She was 52 years old and had been at the same stall on the same stretch of pavement for 11 years. Before that, 4 years at a stall near Makola Market, following the business her mother had built in Kumasi, same product, same customers, same red and white plastic measuring scoop her mother had used until the arthritis made the daily work impossible. When her mother could no longer hold the scoop, she gave it to Adaze the way families give things when words cannot carry what objects can. The pattern on the handle, birds or flowers, it was difficult to say by now, had been worn to an outline by 2 generations of hands. Adaze kept it in the front pocket of her stall apron and reached for it without thinking, the way you reach for things that have been in the same place your whole life. She was not thin and not tall, with a build that belonged to someone who had done physical work since she was a girl and had not had reason to stop. She smelled of shea butter and, in the mornings, of coal smoke from the small fire she kept burning through the early hours before the sun established itself. On this Thursday, she wore a green Kent pattern wrapper dress that had faded, and along the upper sleeves, from 11 years of direct morning sun, the fabric carrying the record of its time in the way cloth does, honestly, without complaint. The dress was clean. She ironed it every Sunday evening on the apartment floor with the second-hand iron she had bought in 2017 for 12 cedis, because if the dress began, the week pressed it was possible to believe, against some evidence, that the week would be manageable. Her son Samuel was 17, and in his final year at the compound secondary school 5 kilometers from their apartment in Dansoman. He was a boy who liked mathematics and explained his reasoning aloud to himself when he worked through problems. A habit Adaze had decided was either very promising or somewhat concerning, and that only time would confirm which. His final term school fees were 1,047 cedis. She had 847 saved in a tin inside the kitchen cabinet. She had 2 weeks and 200 cedis to find. These were the numbers occupying her Thursday morning when the young man in the yellow trainers moved through the crowd at 9:43 a.m., and the wallet left the suit jacket without its owner noticing. She was not a woman who deliberated long about doing what was right. She had not become that kind of person from lack of temptation, but from 52 years of watching the arithmetic of wrong choices done for good reasons, and the arithmetic never came out the way people hoped. She stood up from her stool. She said to the woman 2 stalls down, "Auntie Celestine, watch my things." And she went after the young man in the yellow trainers at the pace of someone who understood that running attracts attention in 2 directions, and she only needed it in 1. She followed him for 3 streets. He turned into a narrow passage between 2 buildings, and she nearly lost him. She came around the corner and found him stopped, the wallet already open, rifling through the contents with his back to the passage entrance. When he looked up and saw her, he dropped it and ran. She picked it up from the ground. She walked back to the main street and found the man who had been on the phone. He was still at the corner, the phone now lowered, one hand pressing the outside of his jacket, the way a hand presses a place where something used to be. She held out the wallet. He looked at it. He took it. He checked the inside quickly, his eyes moving across the contents with the practiced speed of someone accustomed to verifying what belongs to them, and said thank you while already looking at his phone again, not at her face. The black sedan at the curb had its engine running, the driver visible through the windshield. The man in the suit opened the rear door, got in, and the car pulled into the street. Adaze stood on the pavement for a moment, then she walked back to her stall. "What happened?" Auntie Celestine asked. Auntie Celestine had been selling fabric 2 stalls down for 14 years and had a way of asking questions that made clear she already understood the shape of the answer and was only asking to confirm it. Adaze said, "Someone dropped a wallet. I returned it. A lot of money inside. Some." Auntie Celestine made a sound with her teeth and went back to her fabrics. On Monday, a man from the Market Authority came with a clipboard and a printed notice. The monthly stall fee was being revised from 280 setas to 420 setas, effective in 30 days in line with a general rate adjustment across the district. Adaze read the notice, asked for confirmation of the figure in writing, and said she would respond by Friday. When the man left, she opened the small exercise book she kept under the stall table and wrote the number, 420. Below it, 847 saved. Below that, 047 due for Samuel's fees. She subtracted and drew a line under the result, which was a negative number that told her what she already knew. She closed the book. If this story is already sitting somewhere behind your ribs, subscribe now, because what comes next is something Adaze never saw coming. On Tuesday, she ate lunch later than usual because she did not want to stop while the foot traffic was good. On Wednesday, rain came from 11 a.m. until nearly 2 p.m. The kind of rain that arrives in the middle of a market day like an uninvited conclusion to an argument, sudden and total, turning the pavement into a mirror and driving every pedestrian into whatever shelter was available. She pulled the tarpaulin over the stall and sat under it on the wooden bench. The rain hit the plastic above her head the way rain hits plastic, sharp and irregular. A sound that fills in all the other sounds so that the street disappears and there's only the shelter and the world outside it. The smell of the pavement changed when it rained like this. The heat of the morning lifting out of the concrete into something cooler and darker, almost like soil, and beneath that the drainage channel 3 stalls down carrying what the street had accumulated through the morning, and above all of it the rain itself, which had no smell but somehow intensified everything else's. The trotro stop 60 meters away was invisible in the gray of it. She could hear the bus horn from somewhere east on the road, muffled, the driver pressing through. Beside her on the bench, the exercise book. Under the bench, the tin she kept the daily float in. In the kitchen cabinet at home, the larger tin with the 847 setas. 2 weeks, 200 setas. The numbers arranged themselves the way numbers did, without mercy, without flexibility, telling her only what she already knew. That afternoon, Auntie Celestine came with a plate of wakai, rice and beans with shito and fried fish, wrapped in old newspaper the way it always is when someone is bringing it to you rather than selling it. She sat beside Adaze on the bench, and they ate without much talking, which was a thing they did sometimes on days when there was a great deal to think about and very little useful to say about it. "You're thinking about the wallet," Auntie Celestine said. She had a way of stating observations as if they were weather reports, accurate, impersonal, not requiring a response. Adaze said she was not. Then she said there was a photograph inside, a woman in a yellow dress at the beach, standing on some rocks, laughing at something off to the side of the camera. It had been folded once. She looked at the rain on the tarpaulin above her. "I put it back the same way, the same fold. I don't know why I'm still thinking about it," Auntie Celestine said, "because you recognized it for what it was." On Thursday morning, 4 days after she had watched the black sedan pull from the curb, a man in a pressed suit appeared at the end of her stall at 11:07 a.m. He had a briefcase and a piece of paper with her name and stall number on it. He asked if she was Adaze Obi. Her first thought was the Market Authority. Her second thought arrived immediately after the first, the wallet, the narrow passage between the 2 buildings, the young man who had dropped it and run. She had picked up stolen property from a public place and then presented it to a stranger on a street corner. She had no idea what legal category that occupied, and the man standing at her stall with a briefcase did not look like someone who was here to buy groundnuts. He showed her a business card. "Mr. Kwame Asari, attorney at law, licensed in Ghana," he said. "Chief Emmanuel Owusu-Boateng has asked me to find you." She did not know the name. He said, "The man whose wallet you returned last Thursday." The first shape of the problem dissolved and was replaced by something she did not know how to name yet. She said, "Is there a problem?" He said, "Chief Owusu-Boateng would like to meet you." If you are willing. He said it carefully, not as a summons, but as something being offered. He would like to hear what happened from you directly. His driver will come to collect you at whatever time you prefer. He paused. Saturday morning, perhaps, if the stall permits. She arranged it for Saturday. She went back to her groundnuts. The car that came on Saturday was the same black sedan. Kofi, the driver, was a man in his 60s with very clean hands and the economical manner of someone who has spent 2 decades learning exactly how much speech a situation requires. He told her the drive would be 20 minutes. He drove in silence. The chief's home was in East Legon, a white compound behind a wall with bougainvillea growing over the top and a gate that opened automatically. She was taken to a reception room, not to the chief. The man who came in was younger, late 30s, in a dark blue shirt, with the look of someone who had recently made a series of decisions he had not fully thought through and was now defending them. He introduced himself as the chief's son, Kwabena. He sat across from her without an offer of water or tea and said, "My father is unwell. I want to be clear about that. He is receiving many visitors lately, people who have heard he is unwell and who believe this creates an opportunity." He looked at her without warmth. "I want to know who you are and why you think you are here." Daisy looked at him. She said, "Your father's lawyer found me at my stall and said the chief wanted to meet me. I came because I was invited." "Do you know what my father is worth?" She said, "No." "Do you know the kind of claims people make against elderly men who are unwell?" She said, "I returned a wallet. That is the only reason I am here. If that is a claim, I don't know what to do with that." Kwabena looked at her for a moment. Then the door behind him opened. Chief Emmanuel Owusu Boating moved through his own house with the care of a man who had been recently reminded that the body negotiates quietly and delivers its final terms without ceremony. He was 71 years old and thin in the way of a person who had once been substantial. The clothes sat correctly on him, but the wrists inside, the cuffs were thinner than the cuffs had been made to accommodate. He looked at his son for a moment without expression, then at Adesi, and said, "Go and find Kofi, Kwabena. He needs the second set of keys." Chief Owusu Boateng sat across from Adesi in the chair his son had vacated and said, "Forgive him. He is afraid," she said. "Of what?" "Of the same thing most people become afraid of around an unwell man who has money." He said it without self-pity. As a person states a fact they have had time to verify, of what he might do with it before the illness decides otherwise. He looked at her the way older men look at people when they are past the stage of life where they have energy to see anything other than what is actually there. Then he said, "Tell me what happened last Thursday." She told him. She told him exactly. The young man in the yellow trainers, the 3-step distance that was too deliberate to be casual, the 3 streets, the narrow passage, the wallet on the ground where the thief dropped it and ran. She described the young man's face with a completeness that made the chief go still. The specific shape of the jaw, the scar above the right ear, the brand name printed across the back of the trainers, the way he moved when he ran. She had never forgotten a face in 52 years. She told him about finding the man at the corner and returning the wallet and the car at the curb and the drive-away. He said, "What was inside the wallet?" 200 setas, 3 credit cards, a business card, though I didn't read the name, and a photograph. He waited. A woman in a yellow dress at the beach, standing on rocks. She was laughing at something off to the right of the camera. The photograph had been folded once in the middle. I folded it the same way and put it back where it had been. Chief Owusu Boateng looked at the table between them. His hands were resting on its surface. Very still, he said, "That photograph was taken in 1987. The woman in it was my wife. She died 3 years ago." He looked up. "I have carried that photograph in my wallet since the day it was taken." The room was quiet. Outside the large windows, the garden held the morning light in the way that gardens do, indifferently. "Absolutely," he said. "You didn't know whose wallet it was." "No. You ran 3 streets. You described the thief to my lawyer with enough detail to find him. You returned winning 200 setas, and you folded the photograph back the way it had been." He said it not as an accusation and not as praise. He said it the way someone reads a series of facts aloud to confirm they have understood them correctly. "Kofi watched your stall until evening that day, and the next 2 days after." A pause. "He told me this, that on the Thursday afternoon, a man from the market authority came and told you the monthly fee was being raised by 140 cedis, that you asked for it in writing, that you wrote something in a small book under your table, that you didn't raise your voice or speak to anyone about it afterward. The chief's hands remained still on the table. You had just returned 200 citas, and that same afternoon you sat and wrote a number in an exercise book. She did not respond to this. When the woman next to you asked what happened, the one selling fabric, you said a man had dropped a wallet, that it was returned. You didn't say you returned it, she said. It wasn't a story. He looked at her. No, he said it quietly, the way people say things they have been a long time arriving at. He looked toward the window. My son you have met. My nephew has managed my Tema operation since 2021. In every month since he arrived, money has been removed from those accounts in amounts too small to trigger a single audit flag, but too consistent to be accidental. My daughter's husband has twice asked my lawyer to walk him through the terms of the estate, while I am still alive and present to be walked through them myself. He folded his hands. I have been watching the people near me for 2 years, understanding that what I have has made them into something else, something careful, something that calculates. He looked back at her. Then Kofi told me a woman at a groundnut stall ran 3 streets to return a wallet, put a photograph back in its fold, and went home and told no one it was worth talking about. Adazi said, You don't owe me anything for that, he said. I know. That is why I want to do something. He leaned forward slightly in the chair. My lawyers are finalizing 3 documents. A scholarship for your son. 4 years, full fees and accommodation held in a trust administered by Mr. Asar's firm. A 10-year stall lease at a fixed rate, legally independent of my estate, so that whatever happens to my estate cannot reach it. And a letter. He paused. The letter is for my family. I have explained the reasoning behind certain changes to my will. I wrote it because they will need the explanation after I am gone, and because the explanation is honest. I did not write it for you to see. I wrote it because you exist. She looked at him for a moment. Through the window, something moved in the garden. A bird, briefly, on the arm of one of the 2 chairs on the lawn. She said, I didn't return the wallet for this, he said. I know. He said it with the weight of someone for whom this was the point and not the footnote. That is the entire reason. Then he said, I would like to meet Samuel, if he will come. The 3 documents were signed within the week, the scholarship on Tuesday, the stall lease finalized by Wednesday afternoon, the letter sealed and held with Mr. Asara's office. Samuel came to the house in East Legan on the following Saturday and sat across from the chief for 45 minutes and spoke about mathematics and about the problem of how to explain a process when the answer is already visible to you, but not yet to the person you're explaining it to. The chief listened. At the end of the meeting, he told Samuel, Come back before you go. I want to give you something to read. He meant a book. Samuel came back the following Thursday. The chief died 9 weeks after that at home, in the house in East Legan, in the early morning hours, with the garden outside the large windows and the breadfruit tree where it had always been. At the reading of the will, Kwabena challenged 2 provisions through a separate attorney. The estate lawyer presented the 3 documents and the letter, which was 4 pages in the chief's handwriting. The court reviewed it and upheld the provisions. The nephew was removed from the Tema operation 6 weeks later in a board restructuring the chief had initiated with Mr. Asar's office 8 weeks before his death, during the same period in which the stall lease was executed and the scholarship trust was funded. Samuel Obi enrolled in the mathematics department at the University of Ghana in September. He was the first in the family to hold a university enrollment letter. He brought it home and placed it on the kitchen table, and Adazi looked at it for a long time without touching it. The way you look at something you have been building towards so long that when the real thing arrives, it seems less solid than the version you have been carrying in your mind. Then she picked it up and held it with both hands. What Chief Owusu Boateng had come to understand in the last weeks of his life was something that money teaches with great patience to people who have a great deal of it. That proximity to abundance does not reveal character, it conceals it. Every person around him had been made by the fact of his wealth into a careful person, a person who measured their words and their expressions and their requests against what they calculated to be acceptable. He had not, in years, met someone who did not know what he was worth before they met him. Then a woman at a groundnut stall who did not know his name and could not have benefited from his goodwill had run through 3 streets on a Thursday morning and returned what had been taken from him, and had put a photograph of his late wife back in its fold, and had walked back to her stall without saying it was worth mentioning. You cannot manufacture that. You cannot create it in a person through instruction or incentive. It is either there when nobody is watching, or it is not there at all. The world is full of ordinary Thursdays when nothing is at stake and no one is testing anything. But every now and then, on an ordinary Thursday morning, a wallet leaves a jacket and lands eventually in someone's hands, and that someone has a choice that costs them something and benefits them nothing, and in that moment, everything about who they are becomes visible, not to the crowd. The crowd is on its phone, but sometimes to the one person who, without being seen, was watching. There is a version of every life in which the thing that defines it comes dressed as nothing. A Thursday morning, a man on his phone, 3 streets, a folded photograph. The version in which you move is the one you will live in for the rest of your life. The version in which you don't is the one you will also live in for the rest of your life. Both are possible. Only one of them is yours. The morning Samuel left for orientation week, Adazes woke at 5 a.m., the same time she had woken for 11 years, and made tea, and sat at the kitchen table while it was still dark. Samuel came out of his room at 6:15 with his bag and his enrollment letter in a plastic sleeve, and the expression of someone standing at a door they have been looking at for a long time and discovering it was not as heavy as they expected. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. Then he came and took the teacup out of her hands and set it on the table, and he held on to her for a moment the way he had not since he was 9 years old. She let him. Outside, the city was beginning to fill in. A bus somewhere, a gate opening, a radio from the building opposite. The sound of an ordinary morning that had no idea what it was part of. She is 52 years old. The stall lease has 9 years left on it. She still uses the measuring scoop. If you found a wallet full of money on the worst financial day of your year, when the fees are due and the rent is going up and the number in your exercise book is already negative before you've finished writing it, what would you do? Not what you think you should do. Not the answer that sounds right out loud. What would you actually do in that moment? On that Thursday morning, when the crowd is looking at its phone and no one is watching? Leave your answer in the comments. I'd genuinely like to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.